Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter, along with Sarah.
Hi!
And we are going to do a painting on some round watercolor paper today. I will be using Lucas watercolors, and I got these at jerrysautorama.com. They are our sponsor today, and they do have the Lucas paints on sale if you did want to check them out. However, you can use whatever paints that you want. We're going to be doing a vintage style painting. I came across this kind of postcard design from this book that I have. It's really neat. It's full of images from like vintage postcards and vintage advertising, and you can use the photos in here for any of your projects. They're all copyright free, and it comes with a CD in the back so you can print it out and you don't have to cut up your book, or you could photocopy the pages. But it's designed for crafters and artists to be able to use these in their artwork, their collage, their paper crafting, or I find them really fun to kind of draw from once in a while because the arrangements are so sweet and classic, and I just think they're really pretty. So I do have a coupon code in the video description as well as a supply list for all the supplies that I'm going to use today, so you can check that out if you're curious about anything. And Jerry's Autorama does have a 25% off discount for my viewers, so make sure you check that out if you are going to go shopping and save yourself some money. Because I think the best discount they have on their website right now is only 10%, so you'll want to use the good coupon. So when you want to design for round paper, oh, by the way, if you have any questions, just type the word question in all caps, and then can either help you or relay the question to me if it's something that stumped them or that hasn't been asked before. So to design something for a round piece of paper, obviously if you look at this picture, it's more of like an oblong design, and I really wanted it to be balanced and fill the paper. So what I did was I just took a piece of typing paper, because that way I know I'd be able to scan it in to my scanner so you guys could have a copy of this, and that's linked down below as well. And what I did was I just kind of folded a piece over like that and made a mark, so I know like what would be like a square, and then I just kind of drew kind of my edges in so I would get a circular design. So of course you could trace a plate or use a compass or whatever, but that's a real easy way to do it if you don't have anything handy. And then I just sketched out my objects and made sure to like throw a few leaves, maybe shift a flower over so that I could turn this into more of a round design. So there's just kind of a nice way to go about it. Now to make your own round watercolor paper, because pickings are a little slim as far as what you can find for round watercolor paper out there, and it's just a little more versatile. If you have rectangle paper, you can cut to whatever you want. What you want to do is set your paper down, and I wish I kind of realized this first. You want to set it down with the backside up. Put a dinner plate down over it so the dinner plate is tight against it. Then take an X-Acto knife and score around the edge, and that's going to make your paper tear easier. Then while it's still attached, you want to tear the paper across while you're pushing down on the plate, so it just gives it something to rip against. And then you have a really nice deckled edge, which if you want to frame this, you're going to have a hard time finding round frames these days, but you'll be able to frame it in a square frame and like mount it on a colored card so that you see that pretty deckled edge, and then you could do a regular mat around it so it could fit a square frame. So that's what I would do. Round frames were much more popular in the Victorian era, but kind of hard to come by now. If I had done it that way, I see I've got a much nicer deckled edge on the back. I don't know if you can really make that out that well. On the front I can kind of see my little score line. So just do it on the back, save you from that mistake. As far as colors for a vintage palette, you're going to notice that vintage coloring is not as bright and crisp and transparent as what we're used to. And they probably did these illustrations in gouache, which is a watercolor that has white in it. So in order to make our vibrant colors that we typically work with more muted, we are going to turn them into tints or shades by adding white or black. So if you add black to a color, you get a tint, which is kind of desaturated. It's less lively than, say, if I took blue and I added orangey red to it, I would get a much richer gray or a richer neutral. If I add black, I get a much more muted color. So to get that muted vintage palette, that's a great way to do it. There's a lot of vintage paints being sold right now, like not vintage paints like old paints, but modern companies making vintage palettes, and they all have a lot of white and usually some black in them to desaturate them. But you can do that with the paints you already have, and it's a little bit more versatile of a palette. If you start with single pigment colors, then you can always mute them down. So keep that in mind. And it's funny because you'll always hear people that are like, well, I won't paint with black and I won't paint with white, but they're painting with colors that have white and black already in them. You're better off to start with your pure colors and then turn them into tints and shades for a vintage look. I still think it's a better idea to mix the opposite, to get a neutral if you're doing like typical modern painting, or just you want a really crisp and clean and fresh look. But today we're going to look at the vintage palette and paint that way. Any questions so far?
We do.
Okay.
Pop up.
I'm hoping my voice holds out. I'm surprised at how long it's taken my voice to recover.
Back.
Yeah.
Cat's Cradle. Are the paints she's using today artist grade?
Yes, they are. These are the Lucas 1862 watercolors. They are extremely bright and they're very affordable. Jerry's Artorama, I think, is the only company that sells them in the United States. They're made in Germany, and they have the tried and true pigments that you would come to expect from an artist grade paint. And I wouldn't rate them as my top paint because I also have other ones that I prefer. Like I prefer M. Graham and Rembrandt and Core, but they're definitely, for the money, they are probably one of the best deals going. Now I'm just kind of wetting the background around my design with just some clear water because I do want to put something in here, but I'm not sure if I'm going to go right out to the edge of my paper or not, so I'm just kind of wetting in and around. I just want to get some sort of tone on there. If you look at this vintage postcard, the postcard itself is kind of a cream color, so I thought it might be kind of nice to get a little bit of toning somewhat in there, maybe a kind of an ochre color. And you can use whatever colors you like. I just wanted to get the kind of the tint and the shade explanation down, which you would see much more in like oil painting or acrylic painting, or even gouache, something that it's a little bit more of a thicker paint that goes opaque, more opaque. If you're looking for a bargain paint, Lucas makes a student grade called Lucas Studio that's really good for beginning artists and teachers. It's like $11 or $12 for a set of 12, and it's very similar to the common sketcher box in size, but the colors themselves are much more vivid. They are a little bit more opaque though, so I will warn you there. But if you need to outfit a class, it's a wonderful option. Okay, so I've wet the parameter. I haven't done anything to the back. I haven't taped it down. I thought about just spraying the back and sticking it to the paper, to the table, but I think it's going to be fine. I'm going to stick with these colors that I said I was going to use, and I want to make kind of like an ochre color, so I'm going to go with my Lucas Red and my Cadmium Yellow. So it's a warm yellow, warm red. Doesn't have to be the exact colors I'm using. You can actually use yellow ochre for this, but I just wanted to show you kind of how to mute these colors down. Okay, now I will add a little bit of ultramarine there to darken it, because I want a little bit of a brown. That's not ultramarine. There we go. I should know my ultramarine is always the pan. I'll shift it over so you can see. The ultramarine blue is always the pan that gets the biggest dent in it first. That's a favorite. We'll do a little more red. A little more cad yellow, and we're just going to get a nice rich orangey color. And then I want to desaturate this. I want it to be a little duller. I'm going to add some white. I'm just going with a white that's in my pan set here, but you could use a white gouache. You could squirt a little bit out from a tube. That might be a little more convenient just because, you know, if you're worried about contaminating the pan. Now we get this nice kind of peach color, and I think I like that, but if that was a little too bright for you, then you could add a little black.
You slide watching you mix it there, that's better. It was just cut off.
Oh, okay, yep.
See the hole. Stephanie Pajari, I'm new to watercolors. Any tips or brush suggestions to control the water in my brush? I end up with way too much or much too dry.
I would first ask what kind of brush are you using, because that can make a big difference. Getting something that's like a golden Taklon will want to drop all the water at once, oftentimes, especially if you're trying to hold a lot of water. Whereas either a natural hairbrush or one of the nice, like this is the Mimic Kolinsky, it's a faux Kolinsky, and there's also the Mimic Squirrel. They're much more absorbent, so they'll hold the water longer. So see, I haven't even gone back to grab any more paint yet. This is just from that first brush load. Sorry about that. So you can go, look how far I was able to go with that because this brush is more absorbent. And any of your natural hair brushes would be that way too. I just prefer to use a more humane brush. And then also having your paper a little damp so that you're not fighting with it. So it's not like sucking all the water out of your brush before you get a chance to move it anywhere. So you want to make sure that you've got, you know, your paper the right dampness for what you're trying to do. My pencil lines are smudging a little bit, so I'm just being aware of it. I'm not too worried about it. And I'm going to switch to a round brush in a second so I can sneak in between some of these flowers a little bit easier. But I linked the Mimic Squirrels down below. Those are my favorite. But if having a super soft brush is, if you're a beginner, sometimes a super soft brush is a little difficult. The Mimic Kalinskis are a little bit firmer. They're closer to a golden taklon, but they'll still give you that absorbency that you want.
Jenny, is there a way to get that cream color with watercolor, like on the inspiration postcard? Would it be adding black to the current color?
Yeah, you just a smidgen, just enough to desaturate it a little bit. We'll do that in a second. I'll take some of the leftover paint and I'll add a little black to it and just show you. Actually, no, we could do that for as we're going in a little bit closer to get a little bit darker of a color anyway. So I'll just add a little bit of black. There you go. It gives it more of like a creamy taupe color as opposed to like a Jaune Brilliant color. Nice way to also deepen that color and give it a little bit more depth for your shadow areas. And feel free to do your own sketch with whatever flowers you like if you don't care for the morning glories.
Joe P. Has Lindsay ever had a problem with ants in honey-based watercolors like M. Graham?
No, I never have, but I have heard people talk about it, and even paints with glycerin have given people some issues in the past. But I haven't had any issues with it myself. If anybody has, I'd love to hear about it. It could have something to do with climate as well.
I was just gonna say we do live in a colder climate, so they
Yep.
they are underground for many months at a time.
Now when I get to an area where those two colors are going to touch, I'm going to clean my brush and grab some of the lighter color without the black and just kind of go in between. I'll let the colors kind of mesh together. Paper towel so I can blot. You don't want to go in with a wetter brush than what you have, or you're going to end up with a back run. And these darker colors with white can tend to back run a little bit more and lift a little bit more because the white makes them sit on top of the paper. That's why they appear more opaque. Well, one of the reasons they appear more opaque because the color doesn't absorb in, it sits on top. If you want to add that darker color anywhere around your edges, feel free. If the paper's still damp, you should get a fairly nice blend. And if it doesn't want to blend out too much, it's fine because sorry about that. It'll still look fine. It'll look more kind of designy and printed than painted, but that's kind of part of the look that we're going for. I have to keep looking back at my reference image to figure out if something's background or foreground. Okay, so just like anything, we want to avoid painting next to an area that's still wet. So we're going to go into this flower here, which is mostly white. But this we can actually use the white of the paper for because it's a nice crisp color. And I'm going to start by, I'm going to wet the middle of it, but I'm going to leave the outsides pretty dry. So just about, I would say, Think of it like an egg yolk, and you're just wetting like the area that would be yellow here. And now I'm going to grab some cad yellow. I'm going to add a little bit of white to it. It's still plenty bright. I'm going to add this into the center. The other thing that the white will do for your paint is it will make it a little easier to control, being that it's not gonna flood away from you so easily. So you can keep your marks where you want them a little bit easier. And pull out a little bit of veining, a little bit of streaking out from the center. As you get to the dry paper, and it will keep a nice sharp mark on the dry paper. And now I'm going to add a little bit of the Lucas red, or whatever warm red you're using. A little bit of that to the center.
Bev Roberts, if you use a fugitive color mixed with a light fast color, will the mixed color be fugitive or light fast?
The fugitive color will fade and the light fast color will remain. So say if you mixed purple and used a blue that was light fast and a red that was fugitive, when it faded you just have the blue. Now I'm going to grab the red on its own. Actually, before that I'm going to make some gray, and I'm just going to add a little bit of depth to the edges. I'm going to start with my ultramarine blue, and I think I'll just add a little bit of white and black to that, but I definitely want to have that blue undertone. Blot my brush off because I have a little bit more on there than I want. It's actually really fun to paint with colors that you're not accustomed to. Breaking some taboos, some rules here. But it really does give you that vintage look, which would be really pretty done in the bright colors. Don't get me wrong, it just wouldn't have that that just subtle Victorian feeling. I'm just dabbing a little bit of that in the center and letting it blend in. If you want to switch to a smaller brush, you can, or you can use the bigger brush. Just keep the paint on the bristles and keep the brush fairly dry, because you don't want to like get in there with too much paint. So I'm blotting mine off. I want it as dry as I can have it where the bristles will still stay together, or go to a smaller brush. I'm going to pick up some of the red because this is going to be a punchy color. And I am going to just pull some lines off of the edge towards the middle.
Could you just discuss framing something around piece? We have several people in the chat that are wondering about framing something like this.
Sure, actually I can show you, I'll show you an example in just a second. Let's get these reds in there, then I'll go grab a visual aid to help here. I'm just going to pull in those little red stripes. Almost looks like a petunia, kind of. This one might be a petunia. I always think it's interesting the type of flowers that you see in Victorian art. You definitely see a lot of like violets and pansies and petunias and morning glories. And that must be what grew maybe in Victorian England more readily. All right, let me show you how I would frame this. I'm just walking across my studio and grabbing a couple visual aids. Excuse the dead air for a minute. Okay. Now these aren't necessarily the colors I would use, but just to give you an idea. Since round frames are difficult to find, what I would do is I would mount this on a color of mat board that was visually pleasing. So I might pick a color from, like, I might do yellow, I might do purple, I might do blue. I would pick a color that's representational for the artwork, and then I would mount it on mat board that's acid free, and then I would cut a mat and I would put the mat around it and put it in a square frame, which you can usually find square frames fairly easily, or you can order the frame edges from Jerry's Artorama and you can make your own frame. It's so easy. You don't need to be a carpenter. You literally put the frame together and you push these little they look like bow ties into the corners, and it's very easy. But that's what I would do, because you still get that protection and you still get to show off the roundness of it and you get to show off the decollage. So You might have a different. What would you do? Because
well, I mean, if someone doesn't want to do that particular, you can go to a framing, or if you know somebody who cuts mat board, there are ways to cut. Circle in a square, so you could get the circle cut out, but then it would be a lot easier to buy like a 8x10 or 16x20 or 14 by 16 frame, like a standard size. So I mean, there's a couple different good options.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
So it's kind of whatever your aesthetic is and what you're looking. They also make the float frames where you could mount it onto the acid-free mat board.
That'd be pretty.
And put it in a float frame, so it just kind of looks like it's
Oh,
so
that's
there
a pretty
are
idea.
multiple, there's, a couple different ways to go.
Oh, I like the float frame idea. I totally forgot. I actually had an oval circle mat cutter, but I was doing something and I pulled it off its track and I could never get it
back.
Yeah, it's still sitting in a drawer. I don't know what to do with it. I hate to throw it away because I remember paid good money for that, but I don't know what to do with it. I can't fix it. Okay, so there you have a couple solutions. So I'm going to see if this is dry. I think this one's dry enough. So what we're going for now is this kind of dusty mauve color here. And that's pretty easy because one of the colors that I suggested was this PB19 mauve. I'm actually going to see if it has a different... They call it purple in the Lucas set. If you're using Winsor & Newton, they call it mauve. And it's just this nice kind of plum color. Now, if you notice when you're mixing and you're using a round brush and you're getting a lot more water in your mix and you're not getting your color as pasty as you want, that's when you want to switch to one of those synthetic brushes, because these golden haired brushes here, these Taklon bristles, they are firmer, and that way you can get the color up without adding a lot of water to your pan. So if I scoot this over so you can see, I'm able to just get tons of color up without adding a lot of water. So I'm going to keep that in mind. All right, so this definitely, the mauve in the picture is, it's a little darker, but it's also more black. It's more gray, I should say. So I am going to go right in with the ivory black.
Joe Maskey, which black is this? Didn't see it on the color chart at the top of the video.
This is ivory black.
Bev Roberts, to follow up on the fugitive color, if you use Dorland's wax to seal the watercolor, will it protect the fugitive color from fading?
It will protect it like like if you're using that color in acrylic and oils, how it has that natural binder protecting it a little bit more. It's not going to make it 100% light fast. I was actually just in multiple craft stores yesterday getting some stuff to do some Christmas decorating with, and I did see some UV spray varnish. So if you did the Dorland's wax, then you went over with some UV spray varnish, it would help you. I'd still go under, I'm a big fan of glass, matting with glass for watercolors. You can get UV glass. So there are different options there. I haven't used it, so I'd hate to say 100% that it's going to take care of what you need, but I think it's, I think it'll help for sure. I don't know if Dorland's on its own will. I would definitely use UV spray. So I'm going in on dry paper because I want to have some of these crisp lines, like crisp mauve lines here. And I'm leaving the center alone because I'm going to be putting some white, not some white, I'll be putting some yellow and leaving some white. And I want to bring that mauve color up against the other flower and leaf that's next to it so that I can have a little bit of a shadow. I might even mix that in a little bit darker, just take some more mauve and some more black. And the other neat thing about using white is it can give you some interesting textures too. Like it can granulate a little bit more because it doesn't absorb into the paper so much. It sits on top more, so if you're just doing one layer, it can give you some really pretty granulation effects. Now I'm going in from the outside of the flower and dragging in some lines because that's going to give us a rounded, like, trumpet shape to that flower. And you can go on, there's we could just even just go to Google and search vintage postcard images, or even be specific saying vintage daffodil or vintage pansy, something like that, and get some beautiful reference images. And most of those would be in the public domain, if not all of them. There's also a website called, I think it's called the Vintage Moth, or Graphics Fairy. That's what I'm thinking of, Graphics Fairy. And she has tons of different things like this that you could download for free and use in your projects. That's looking a little bit too dense to me, so I'm going to blot some of that off. Okay, now I'm going to take a little bit of the Lucas Red, I need to have a clean spot on my palette. I'm going to do the Lucas Red with a little mauve just to give it a little bit more of a pink. Because look how that's so bright on its own. So these colors, these bright colors, we're using these bright colors just by adding white and black. We're able to get a beautiful vintage palette. And I'm not saying don't go buy these beautiful vintage palettes that are available, but I'm saying that you don't have to if you don't want to. I know sometimes we just want things and we want to buy them. And I totally get that, but but you can totally get a very similar look. Now you can see already this color, just from what we've been painting, hopefully you can see on camera, it just looks too bubblegum. And that's because we've added black to everything except for this. So it doesn't fit. So we need to add just a little bit. We don't need a ton, but just a little bit to make that go into the vintage palette we've been working with. So this is how you use your white and your blacks appropriately. So they're not a crutch. You're not adding black because you don't know what to do to darken a color. You're adding black for the specific reason that you want to get a vintage vibe in your artwork. So that's, I think, where the big issue comes, where people's like, well, I don't use black, I know how to mix colors, I don't use white. They have characteristics, kind of like an art medium would, that you would add to your paints to get a specific result. And if you use it with intent, there's no reason that you can't use any color that you want to use in your artwork. So we've built up the colors here just by little streaks of color, and that's given us some nice depth. We've got a nice roundness to it because you almost see like a sheen here where it's a little bit lighter. And now we're going to go in the center with a little bit of that cad yellow plus white. And you can always add a little something else into it if when you put it on the paper it seems too dark or too light. And I'm just going to drag this up to the, I got a cough, I'm sorry. I'm just going to drag that up to the purple there, and then I'm going to be leaving a little bit of gap the rest of the way across. I'm going to add a little bit, I'm going to mix a little bit of the Lucas Red in there. And add that to the edge. And it's really important to have a visual aid like I have here, because I don't paint in this style and this color palette very much, so I wouldn't be able to guess what would come next. So if you're not familiar with something you're trying to paint, there is absolutely nothing wrong with getting something to help you like that. Okay, I'm still feeling like that. You'll also notice less shift. When you've added white to your paint, you're not going to notice that it's going to change that much when it dries. So you can, if you've got a decent amount of white in there, you can pretty much trust when it dries you're going to have what you're expecting or what you originally put down. Like that has not shifted at all. This background hasn't shifted at all. Now we're going to go back to that red that we used here, because that also shows up in that flower. I think I might go to a smaller brush because that was a little much. That was kind of overkill. This one's a little too small.
A little creative. Can you explain the difference between adding black to a color to mute it down and adding the color's complement?
Yes, when you add black to a color, you're going to desaturate it more. So if you add, well, I can show you here. I've added black to each of these colors, and it gives you a very kind of deader, it gives you a deader color. It's a less colorful color. So if I take yellow and purple, for instance, instead of yellow and black or purple and black, if I do yellow and that mauve color, I might need to add a little bit of blue to make a true purple. I just end up with a little bit richer of a color, a little more lively of a color. Oh, I'll tip it like that so you can see. So you see how that's a little bit richer and that's a little bit duller? So that's a big difference. That's why you typically don't use black, you typically use a complement, but today we want that that dull effect to get that vintage effect, which is going to give us a really soft and pretty look. All right, got the Lucas Red, I got a little bit of white there on my palette. I'm going to grab a little bit of black. And we're going to add some of that here. We're going to start towards the center, and just I'm going to make two little lines that kind of make like a long V. Two little veins side by side. If it's too dark, you can blot it. I'm going to blot that one there. It seems a little too bold. But colors with white added do lift easier, so if you do need to blot it, that's not a big deal. But we're waiting to do all the centers and the flowers until we're done, because they will they'll run if it's damp at all. Okay, we've got another flower to do just like that, so if we don't get to it, we don't get to it. Let's do this blue one here. We're going to go with ultramarine blue. We're going to add a little pressure to that. Add a little bit of white. And let's put in some of the color with this. We're going to put in our kind of highlight colors. I'm just kind of like piecing this color in. This is a really pretty color, but look how bright it looks because we didn't put black in it yet, so it almost looks a little too bright compared to the rest of these colors that we have here. But we do want to have a little bit of brightness. Now I'm going to go and add a little bit of black. I'm going to do a little bit more pressure. A little bit more ultramarine. Maybe a smidgen more black, and this is going to go around here. We're going to start bringing that out from the center. There is going to be yellow in the center, so we just want to make sure that we don't go all over that area. And the little veins lines that I drew, those are going to be where the red veins are, so we don't want to go over all of that either. We're kind of building little layers. There's a lot over here, so I don't want to put too much there. Now I had to draw more flower here because to make it into a round composition, so I'm just kind of guessing what's going to be in this area. And I think we'd have more dark back here because the petal's overturned. Because they're kind of like trumpets, how they open up. And you may have a little bit of dark on some of these really bent over edges. It's really nice to put some dark paint if it's right next to a light flower. It just helps them separate a little bit and gives you a little bit of dimension. And now we'll go for more of a, actually, I'll just wipe my brush off and kind of drag some of that paint around. And that will give me a nice light tone. Ooh, I think that's really pretty. Now, as long as your paint hasn't set up too much, you can do this. If your paint's already started to dry, you might end up getting some blossoms, which are those little cauliflower shapes. But I feel like paint that's got white in it just does not dry as quick, so it can sit there on the surface and wait for you, which is kind of how gouache is. How are we doing on questions?
We're all caught up for the moment.
Oh, good. Okay, now we can go in with our yellow. And cad yellow, a little bit of white. This one does have a brighter yellow center, so I'm going to go in with this first, just in the center, and see how that looks. Blotted off the extra because I had too much on my brush. That's I usually say work with the biggest brush you can, but sometimes when you're mixing color, you will end up wasting paint because you just had to blot a bunch off. So, there's exceptions to that rule. If you're working on a small painting, you might just end up wasting a lot of paint when you mix if you do that. Yeah, I like this. I think that's all right. Now I'm going to grab our little red mix here. I didn't even wash my brush because I know I'm going to go right next to it. And I am just going to see if I can sneak these red lines in without too much bleeding. And you'll get to know how much you actually have to wait, what you can get away with as far as sneaking your colors in. And I'm doing little tiny, trying to keep my hands out of the way, sorry if they're in the way, little choppy lines between the yellow and the blue with my red here to give a nice transition. I'm pretty sure I'd have a red line there. All right, leave that one be for now. Now I think, actually we have one more flower, but it's right next to that blue leaf, so the blue petal, so I'm gonna wait. Let's do some of these buds here that are red. We're gonna go with that same color we've been using for the centers. They almost look like little chili peppers, kind of. I'm gonna start just by putting the tip of my brush in, I'm pressing and lifting, and you can do that in pretty much one stroke. You know, if you want, you can use a credit card scraper. However, I think that's going to look a little too modern, so I think we'll just wait and go in later with just a few lines for shadows. We'll just kind of glaze those on. I need to mix up a little bit more of that color. We need a lot more red in that. This is probably our brightest bit. I'm going to add a little yellow to that. But I mean, that's very much like one of those colors in the vintage palettes that are really popular right now. And we'll do one of these here.
Moonram, is there any reason why you chose watercolors over gouache to paint this piece?
I thought gouache might be a little too heavy. I still felt like this piece was very delicate. And I also know that most of my viewers have watercolors, so they wouldn't have to get something new or try to improvise with watercolors if I was using gouache. I got a little sloppy with that. My brush was a little too wet, but I think it's going to be fine. Alright, I think that's all of the little red buds that we have. Now I have a couple non-opened ones there, flowers here, just kind of little trumpets, and well, actually I just have one. The other ones are leaves. So we're going to do that. It's going to be the same color as that flower that's right there, and that's going to be mostly mauve. And I'm actually going to add it to that blue that I had made before. So it's the both of your blues plus some black. And we're going to add some white to that. There was a little white in there, but not very much. Okay, and we'll put some of that. Make sure you can see. I should probably switch to a smaller brush, actually, because I feel like I have enough on this brush to paint a barn. But we can go ahead and we can start. So I just put some streaks in there. There's nothing really fancy about that. I'm going to go over here and work on this flower. There's only a little bit that's that light color, so I'm just going to dab that in. It's kind of around the center, around where the yellow is. Just make sure when you put your strokes of color in that you're kind of like, if you've ever seen a petunia or morning glory and you see those lines that come out, the lines of color, you want to go with that direction, like from the inside to the outside, like you're curving along those petals with your lines.
Jenny, if you are not good with pigments color mixing yet, is there a vintage watercolor set you would recommend that already has muted colors?
Well, there's the Pastel Dreams set. Prima has one, and there's also one by Mungio, but it's way more expensive if you get it by Mungio. Usually the opposite's true. There is also the new vintage. There's a new vintage set from Prima that I have not used, but they're all really muted colors. But they're your basic kind of like fashion colors that had a lot of white added and a little bit of black added, I believe. There might be pigment information on their website, but I haven't gone to it because I didn't foresee myself getting that set, so I didn't really investigate it too much. But that's probably would be probably the easiest to find, most economical vintage set out there. I'm going for this kind of purpley muted eggplant color, so both blues, mauve, and black. That color's pretty close. And now I'm going to add in the darker colors. I'm going to go around the contour of the overlapping items just so that's nice and smooth. So I want to get that in there before I start trying to drag my colors in. And after I get that in there, I can start whisking in these little wisps of color. Leaving a gap for some red. It's funny how much better colors blend, like if you like a soft blend, when you have white in them. That does definitely, that's probably why a lot of those palettes that are kind of muted and have those vintage colors are more geared towards paper crafters, because they're probably coloring an image. Their goal for that is to finish off a scrapbook page or a card, not to like mix colors or paint a picture. They've got a specific task they're trying to do with them.
Moonram, did you draw the outlines dark so that we can see, or did you want it to be dark?
I drew them pretty dark so you could see. I actually scanned this versus my sketch because my sketch was so sloppy, and I didn't think you guys would be able to, I wouldn't be able to scan that. It wouldn't show up. So yeah, you could definitely stay a lot lighter. My scanner likes to have really contrasted images. And I'm just dragging a little bit of that yellow up into the rest of the flower. And the colors, you're going to notice, it's odd. They blend well, but they don't overtake another color. So if I go over here with this yellow that's got white in it, right on top of the purple, it's not like mixing into a block. They're kind of standing their own ground. But if I nudge them together, the edges are going to be soft and blended with each other. It's kind of weird to explain. Alright, I'm going to get some red here. Same mix that we've been using. I did add a little more red to it because it looks a little pink, a little too muted. And we're going to put that going from the outside in. I'll put a little bit in the center because I was feeling it like it just needed a little bit of texture there. Okay. We'll really quickly finish up that flower there, which is the same color scheme as doing that one. We'll do the red parts first, and I'm just gonna do this one real quick. Do you have any questions? So since
caught up still for the moment, lots of chat, but
oh good. How many people do we have today?
298.
Nice. Yeah, it's been 2 weeks since we live streamed. Trying to get the hang of my new camera.
Well, I did cover the shop, and then your voice was no bueno, so
yeah. Tis the season. 3 kids in 2 schools. They're bound to come home with everything. Although they haven't been sick, so I don't know.
They're just bringing all their germs back from school that you're not immune to.
That must be it. That must be it. Now I'm just quickly blocking this in so we won't have to spend a bunch of time on this. And the little overturned area, I'm going to do more with the red to give it a little contrast. I feel like I need a little bit of blue in this one. So I'm going to just make myself a blue-gray. I'm going to do the ultramarine blue, some black, and some white.
Jenny, she said she scanned the image. Did Lindsay print the image on watercolor paper with a computer printer?
No, I took my sketch over to my light box and I transferred it that way, and then I put my watercolor paper in my scanner and scanned it. Did she have a hard time seeing it, or was she just wondering because the lines were so dark?
I think she was just wondering because the lines were so dark.
Hopefully it's dark enough for everyone to see in the scan. I think it is. Sometimes though when I scan watercolor paper, I get that weird watercolor paper texture as well. All right, so now we're going to do some leaves. I think we'll probably stick with a round brush, even though typically we'll do leaves with a flat brush, just because the brush strokes in the leaves are they look like they've been done with a round brush. And I think, let's start off with kind of that bright yellow-green. PY 129 is also called green gold, green yellow, and Lucas. I'm going to add some white to that. Now the thing is, we're going to be doing layering on these leaves, and the thing with layering, if you have white in your paint, is that your paint will be more likely to lift, so you do have to be aware. Use a soft brush and, you know, an economy of strokes. So pretend that you're being charged $10 a stroke. You know, don't put any more than you have to. A couple little strokes in from the ends. This is a nice bright yellow one. Reminds me of the vintage fabric. You might see like upholstery fabric with those big vintage patterns. I love that because it looks like they were just stamped on top of each other. Kind of like the layering stamps that are really popular right now.
Yeah.
I love that look. Reminds you of something my grandmother would have. I want a little red in this one here. If I can see that in this the yellow has a little bit more of a tone of red, I will just go ahead and grab it right then, and then I'll just go next over to another leaf that has that same coloring. Actually, I should have some of that color on this flower I'm seeing. Oh, I totally forgot that red on that guy. I don't clean my brush off a lot in between these colors because it helps to kind of keep everything in that same vintage realm. Well, there aren't too many spots that need the yellow, but I do need to mix a little bit more because I'm running out.
Azalea P, how to teach watercolor painting to kids? What is the first step to teach them?
Well, I would find a no-fail project. I have one like that I've always done. Well, actually, I've done it with kids and people of all ages. We do birch trees, so we stick masking tape down to some watercolor paper, and they can spatter and just dab and just play with the paint, and it's really freeing and fun. And then when they're done, they peel up the tape, and they have this forest of birch trees, and they can dab on black. You know, I wouldn't be too fussy about color theory with a young age. You're going to experiment and learn it on their own. You don't need to give them a bunch of rules until they're older. But when they're little kids, you just want to let them play and experiment, not, you know, squash the joy out of creating. But if you can find some kind of quick wins like that will really get them excited and maybe get them playing with their paints at home more, that's what I would recommend. Just find some projects that are good. Lupins are good. I've quite a few projects on my channel. I called the playlist Beginner Start Here, or Beginner Watercolor Start Here, and there's a lot of projects like that you could adapt for kids' classes. Because a lot of times kids, the only watercolors they've used have been the chalky ones that, you know, come at school, you know, that I don't want to bash any brands, but
inexpensive.
You know, little ovals that
buy large quantities for an affordable amount of money.
You have to dig for any color. So I mean, that's what they've been used to. So once
brushes are all splayed because they're just like digging into the paint.
Yeah. I usually use Royal and Langnickel watercolors to teach kids with because they're non-toxic. I mean, well, I'm watching. I'm not letting them eat the paint or anything, but they're they're inexpensive, so inexpensive. You just put a little drop down, and when they see how far that goes, you think they might go crazy and waste it, but they really don't. They'll respect good materials. Now we're doing a layer of this medium green, so it's a green gold. I've added some ultramarine blue and some Prussian blue to it, and we're going to start adding that layer.
Lila Cloveheart, is there a name to the technique you use to color the blue flower?
Let's see, we did wet on dry. That's the name for that technique, I guess. I want to let a lot of that yellow show through. I didn't put that yellow on just to cover it up, or that green gold color. I want to leave as much of that showing as I can. These leaves will be 3 layers. I gotta mix up more color already.
Geraldine M., how do you decide when to use your good paints as opposed to the lesser quality paint? Example, using the Schminky versus the Cotman.
You know, a lot of it's just whatever I'm in the mood to paint with. Sometimes I feel a little more free if I'm using cheaper paint because I'm not worried about wasting it. So, I guess if I was going to go outside or maybe go in the kayak or something, I was afraid that I might drop in the water or capsize or something, then I would go with, my little watercolor wheel because I'm not worried about it, or just visiting someone where I'm not sure, if I'll forget them or lose them or whatnot. Or sometimes it has to do with the color selection. Like I was mentioning, those Prima palettes, I'm not knocking them. There's some really beautiful colors there, and they're arranged more with like a paper crafter in mind, so they're in kind of like Decadent Pies, which is a great landscape set, but it's got very rich earthy colors. So like I would grab that if I was going maybe out to the beach and I was afraid that my good palette might get sandy and I didn't want to risk it. Or maybe if I know I'm gonna like sit down and really focus and spend a lot of time on something, then I'll grab more precious palette. But I don't let any of my palettes be that precious, because the minute I'm afraid to use something, I'm just gonna grab it and use it, because you can't let your supplies be precious. I just saw a quote, and it said the only way you waste paint is if it stays in the tube.
That's a really good quote.
Yeah, I thought that was great. I don't know who said it. If anybody knows who said it, let me know, because I've seen it posted on a couple of people's Facebook pages.
I think that's good to remember, regardless of what your preferred medium is.
Oh yeah.
Don't buy it and then hog it, because I have a few things that I've done that, and I pull it out and I'm like, I need to use this because it's just sitting, not being used.
Yep. And don't you hate it when something goes bad, because it's like,
right,
you've had stickers and then they're not sticky anymore, or
Yep.
they permanently stuck to the backing because you didn't use them in time.
Right.
That's so frustrating, and you feel bad because it's like, well, there, I spent money on that and I never got to enjoy it. I think sometimes we collect faster than we can use. I know I do. It's like you buy a bunch of something because it's on a really good deal, and then it's like, oh shoot, I'm not going to be able to use that up unless I better teach a class. That's what I do. Gotta justify that hoard. I bought a bunch of like Prismacolor color pencil sets because AC Moore had them on sale last year for $10 a set of 36, and I'm like, I think I'm going to teach some color pencil classes. And yeah, I haven't taught any color pencil classes. Not yet. Nope.
No, they're sitting
there on my shelf.
Hanging out.
At least they won't go bad. That's a good thing. I also bought a bunch of triangle brushes because I'm thinking I want to teach triangle brush out florals at the Springfield Stamp Show this year.
Ian Jackson, has Lindsay seen or got the new 12 half pan set you can get of Daniel Smith paints?
I haven't, because they're tube poured paints, so I really don't think they'd be any different than the tubes that I have. So, and I don't really need any more sets. But I'm sure they're wonderful, but they are poured, so they would be the same as what I have already in tubes, I think. My next Daniel Smith thing I think I would collect would be the sticks. I have a few of them, and I really like them. And there's like 3 pans worth of paint in one stick, and the sticks are like they're priced at like 8 something, and any tube of paint is going to be so much more than that, and they're all like evenly priced for now anyway. So that's probably what I would probably do that instead. So I'm not sure why they didn't extrude their pans when they've got the sticks, which are extruded, as opposed to poured.
Helen Gillis, I have the Mimic brushes also, and they work. I got questions popping up. And they work for me, but I was told they are poor for watercolor because they have too much snap. What does that mean?
You want a balance between snap and absorbency. So let's look at this brush here. This is a mop, and it's super soft, right? It looks like a blush brush. Like if you put this on your face, it feels so soft, and it's really nice. This has no snap. So if I get this wet, only not dripping on my painting here. If I get this might not be the best. If I get this wet, the bristles are just kind of soggy. They're just gonna flop over and be sad. I'm not gonna be able to get a straight sharp line with that. So this is absorbent, super absorbent, but like it will hold so much water. If I take this and I squeeze it, holds tons of water, but has no snap. So a brush like my Jane Davenport bristles, and most like white bristle brushes, this has tons of snap. Like, see, it just pops right back into place. So these are great for like acrylics because you need a little bit more push to your paint. So what you want for watercolor is something that falls in between. You want a snap because you want your brush to come back and give you that point. See, that comes back to a nice point. It doesn't just flop over like a dead fish. Like if I go like that, it comes back. I'm trying not to completely spray that my computer. And it holds lots of water, holds plenty of water for what you want to do. So that's a nice balance between snap and absorbency, and that's what you want in watercolor. The Mimic Kalinskis, which maybe that's what they're talking about. I don't know if I have any rounds here. I do have a flat. This has much more snap and less absorbency. This is what we did our background with, but you can see that it still had quite a bit of absorbency. See, it doesn't split apart. It have to be pretty dry for it to split apart. It doesn't just flop over like a dead fish when you've got it completely soaked. So that might be what they're talking about, or maybe they're using a different Mimic. They might be using one that's meant for acrylics or oils. But the Mimic squirrels are actually my favorite. I like the Mimic Kalinsky too, but I like the squirrels a little bit more. I think the Kalinsky, because they're snappier, are actually easier for beginners, especially if you're using student grade paints, so you don't have to dig. Because student grade paints have less pigment and more filler, so you do have to kind of dig to get more color up. Sometimes I think my palette's prettier than my painting. I just love how my palette looks right now.
Art Swee, do you use or have you tried the dried powdered watercolors?
I haven't really. I don't use them a lot, and I think probably for the same reason I don't use liquid watercolors a lot, just because they're not all out ready to go in a palette. Where like my pan colors, I can just grab my palette or my tubes that I've squeezed into a palette. I just grab it and go. But they're kind of a neat thing. I did a geranium, like a window box with geraniums, with the brush shows as part of it, not like as the entire thing. And I have done like a kind of like a abstract forest with the brush shows, and that was just like a month or two ago on my channel. So they're really fun. I don't think they're light fast. Because they're kind of like a dye powder, but they are a lot of fun. Did he have any questions, or she have any questions about?
Nope.
Oh, just wondering if I'd use them.
Yep.
But I've got a hoard of them. I've got a whole box of them.
Well, there you go. There's a new video idea for you.
Things I hoard. Yeah, look at this.
Oh my goodness, Lindsay.
Oh, I got problems, but.
but art supplies aren't one of them.
Look, they're fun. I tend to use them more in like crafting, like card making, than in painting though. They're really fun to use with stencils and on art journal pages and stuff. I'm just going to go ahead with this medium green color, and if I see I need a little bud somewhere, I'm just going to throw in that. Now we have our darkest color we need to do, and so for that I am going to start off with Prussian blue. I'm mixing it right into where I was using that lighter color. My water bucket so it doesn't shadow. Grab a little ultramarine blue. And just a little bit of the green gold because I really don't need much. I'm going to add a smidgen of black. And that's just going to give us a really deep kind of hunter color. And let's see, I think I really ought to dry that before I try to layer on, because I do want that layer to be kind of crisp. So if you have any questions while we're drying, let me know.
We're just giggling about when you say you have a hoard of supplies. You really do. I was saying it's not an exaggeration.
They all spark joy, though.
They do.
They all spark joy.
I mean, it's always fun to sit here when the chat's quiet because I can just look around and usually see something I didn't see before.
Especially this time of year because I get a bunch of supplies in from advertisers to promote. Yep. That's how I justify my hoard. If you ever want to justify your hoard, start a YouTube channel.
There you go. if you get popular enough, you'll get free stuff sent to you. So you have to keep it and try it out.
Yep. Yeah, and I also try to obtain products that people request. Actually, if I'm just reviewing a product, it's got to be viewer requested. That's my criteria because otherwise I'd have to buy a new house because it'd just be too much stuff.
Too much stuff.
Okay, so now I'm going in, and I'll show you here. Any place I see the really dark layers on the leaves, that's what I'm going to do now. Okay? And I am using I could actually probably go with a smaller brush even. Just using a Taklon Ultra Round by Lowell Cornell. It's a comfort grip Ultra Round. It just has a really nice point to it. You can use any brush that you have that's got a really nice point. Try to keep this kind of bold and graphic. I know you probably think vintage and not bold and graphic, but the lines are very bold. So if you think of like how fabric is printed or how these old postcards would be printed, they would be lined up and stamped. So you wouldn't have as much blending as you think that you might you would expect.
Bev Roberts, what do you think about using a neutral paint for shadows instead of mixing 2 to 3 regular colors? Seems like cheating.
Well, the reason we're doing here with our black and white is because we want to keep the chroma down. We don't want a very vibrant color. Your values still need to be on point. As long as if your values aren't good, if you don't have darks and lights and you're not using that full range, it's not going to look good. It's going to look just too muted and too mid-range. So you still have to have your values, but the color palette we want to be muted for this particular example. So that's why we're adding the black in, and that would be the same for neutral tint. I don't think there's any cheating. It's just as long as you do it with intent, because maybe that neutral tint has a color bias that you love and you want to impart that in everything you're painting, then that's fine. You still probably will need to know what colors you would add anyway, because there's going to be times where it's not, that neutral tint alone isn't going to give you what you want. One of my favorite live streams I did with you guys was the Grisaille olive oil bottle. I loved how that came out, and I love the process of creating that. And that was all done in neutral tint and then glazed over with other colors. As long as you're you're intentional with it, there's no cheating about it. These are tools for us to use. It's not cheating if we use a pencil instead of like burning a stick and rubbing that on our painting. It's technology. There are advances, and these products exist because they're useful to somebody. whether they're useful as a convenience or they're being used in a very intentional way. That's up to the artist to decide. I need to mix up some more of that. Again, we've got Prussian blue, and we've got ultramarine, and we've got black and green gold. And sometimes you can take black and yellow and make a green. Sometimes that'll work really well, depending on what the undertones of your black are. Actually, I'm curious. I want to see what black and green gold will do. I'm going to clean up a space and try that. That might give us a really interesting green. Let's do our green gold. This Lucas set was the first set of 48 watercolors that I bought, and because it's expensive when you get a set of 48, but these had gone on like a crazy sale a couple of years ago at Jerry's for $114, and I snagged them up. See, now this just looks too warm to me because ivory black has very warm undertones, so you get this kind of like warm olive. So you definitely would need those blues in there to cool it down for this particular piece. For another piece, that might be ideal. When you're working on any painting, turn it as you go so that you can get to every bit of it comfortably. Well, I really like how having this dark color in here enhances. I'm going to need some more mid-tone in this one, though. I didn't make these dark enough. Now that I'm looking at it, they should be more like this one here. There's no cheating, Bo. That was basically what that long tirade was meant to say. There's no cheating. You figure out the tools that are going to work best for you. As long as you know other ways to do it, then you have a nice wide vocabulary to pull from. And that way you won't have a great painting by mistake. You'll have a great painting because you know what colors to choose. And that's what happens sometimes when you're beginning. You don't really know what you don't know, and then you might have something that comes out terrific, and then but you don't know why it came out terrific, and then it's frustrating because you try to do it again, and it's not, you can't repeat the effects. So there's no cheating, but it doesn't hurt to learn as much as you can. This color goes quick.
Jenny, when trying to improve color mixing, would you recommend arranging your pastel crayons, pencils, half pan colors by warm, cool, or complementary contrast, or around the wheel? Around the color wheel, always. And if you don't have a palette, I highly recommend the Stephen Quiller palette because it's a rectangle palette, but within it is a circle, so you can put your colors out like a color wheel, but it will still like store on your shelf like a rectangular palette will. But that is that's a wonderful. I don't know why I don't have that palette. Probably because I got the Jones palette before that, and I don't need another big studio palette. Jacob Ozias, what do you think of the Stillman and Byrne Beta Series sketchbooks? Ooh, I love it. I love their the Beta Series mixed media sketchbook is what I use for watercolor. It's fantastic. And I don't even think it's a cotton paper. I think it's a cellulose paper, but it's so robust. It works great. Remember to let some of that mid-tone show through when you're going in with the darks. You're not just covering up all of that. You're going to be covering up some of it just because there's a little bit of layering, but you don't want to cover everything up. And we might need to go back with a little bit of mid-tone here and there to cover up some if we have too much white poking through from our paper. Melangela Vitalis, could you do your current painting in the grisaille style, or is that limited to specific settings? Oh, sure you could. I think that would work out really well. I'm mixing up some more mid-tone because I feel like I lost
I lost that a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit of the cad yellow to it as well.
Gail AC, is there really much chance of ruining your watercolor brushes using half pans? I don't want to have to buy full pans, or should I?
The only reason I mentioned that in our live stream a couple weeks ago is because if you're trying to get these big brushes and you're trying to pick up paint from a half pan, it's gonna be really difficult, and then you may be like going with even a big round brush like this. It's still gonna, you're gonna have to kind of dig in there a little bit or use a smaller brush and bring it out. So, if you're trying to attack a big brush like this and scrub it into your half pans to get your colors, there's a chance you might damage it. So maybe take the colors that you really love, that you always want to go in with your big Skyflow wash, and squirt those into just an empty full pan, or use a smaller brush to get it out, put it on your palette, and then pick it up with a Skyflow brush. If you're painting really large, if you're painting small, I wouldn't worry about it. If you're painting really large, it might become very annoying to have to keep doing. So like when I'm painting, there's a class I've been taking, and we have to paint on large papers. So I bring my studio palette, which is a big palette with big wells, because I don't want to be spending all my time trying to get paint out of little pans. But for the most part, I paint smaller like this, like 11 by 14 or smaller. So it's totally fine to use the half pans. I would match your palette to the size painting you're doing and the size brushes you're using. But I mean, no, it's not going to hurt if you pull your paint out here into your palette and you pick it up with your bigger brush. And that should be fine. But if you're trying to paint like a 22 by 30 inch painting, and you've got, a number 8 round, and you're constantly going back and digging in for color, that's probably a little too much wear and tear on your brush. And to have another crappy brush just to get your paint out, I think would get really old fast. Definitely interrupt the flow. I'm just going through and seeing if I need some more midtones here and there. Like here, I think I need more midtones, and I need to layer up some more darks. And then we just need to put the centers in our flowers, and we will be all set. And the flower centers, we're going to start off. We can actually probably mix it from what we have on our palette with a little bit of black. Now, black is a warm black. It's an ivory black in this set. And I'll show you here for my swatch. So if you can see, look at Payne's Gray, how cool that is. Look at how warm the ivory black is. It's just, this Payne's Gray is clearly bluish, where the ivory black is almost like a brown black.
Jess C, do you always clean your palette after a piece? I found lately I really enjoy painting with my palette dirt.
Sometimes it's hard, like if your palette looks really nice. But yeah, I generally do, because I'm not going to be using the same colors twice typically. Let's see. I'm just getting kind of, my darks are just too muddy. I need to start fresh here to get some nice darks. So I'm doing cad yellow and cad red, because those are two warm colors, and I know they're going to give me a warm result. And then I'm going to do ultramarine blue, a little more red. There, we're getting a nice brown there. And then I'll top that off with a little bit of the ivory black, so that it harmonizes with everything else that I've been doing. And I'm just going to do little, this is a perfect black for this. I'm just going to do little, I almost don't even want to put the stems down for them, because I did there, and I think that's too heavy. So maybe just do little spots, and then we'll go in with something a little bit lighter for the stems. Let me see if I can actually blot that, because I regret those stems, huh? Oh well, I can go in with some white. And I also noticed these guys over here need a little more finishing. So we need a highlight and a shadow on those. So for the shadow, since my red pen is pretty grimy looking there, I'm just going to grab that red grime off the top. Mix it with a little bit of that brown that I just made. And just kind of go in and let's add some streaks, just to show kind of like the folds in the unbloomed flowers here. Just kind of makes like a spirally line around them. Can add a little bit of juicy red in there too. And then I'm going to grab some pure white because I think it's going to mix in with what I have. Those pure is, I'll clean off the grime on the top of this. Maybe grab a little bit of red there in case it doesn't mix as much as I think it's going to. And then I'm just going to do some little highlight strokes. And they will lighten, like as they absorb into the paint layer below. They're not going to absorb into the paper, but they will absorb into the paint below. They will lighten up. And grab, I just want to make a lighter brown color to use for the stems, because that black was just too dark. And also a finer brush. And there, I think I'm going to call this done as far as the live stream goes. Of course, you can put some more time into it if you want to, and or even go in with other medias if you want to. If you wanted to go in with colored pencil, I would try to stick with kind of like a soft touch so that you're not getting like really big bold streaks or anything. But if you just wanted to like enhance something a little bit, you totally could do. I just want to do a little, I forgot to do little centers on that one. That would look really pretty, or just leave it as is. It's always a good practice to step away from your painting for a bit. I also forgot to do little highlights on the little bits there, the little what do you call them, little leaves that are kind of hugging the buds there. They need a little bit of highlight. So, you know, give your eyes a break and come back, look at it, see if you need to add anything else. But that's pretty much working with tints and shades and a vintage palette and round paper. So I hope this gives you some new ideas for your stash, so that if you're feeling square, you know, like a square, you can be all hip and round, right? That's so cool. And I also have a tutorial on how to make a little round watercolor block if you like this format and you want to make some that you could take with you. The kids say I'm not cool. Can you believe that?
Yeah, I can, because I'm not cool anymore either. I'm okay with that.
Does anybody have any questions before we go?
We're all caught up.
Awesome. Guys, please give me a thumbs up before you go, because some joker put a thumbs down before we even began. Some psychic joker who knew the stream was not going to be to their liking. So hit the thumbs up before you go.
Heck with them.
And that's it, I guess, if we're all caught up with questions.
We are.
Awesome. You can get the supplies I used today at our sponsor, jerrysartorama.com. These are the Lucas watercolors. I'm using the 48 set. They also have them in individual pans as well as tubes. So if you just want to try a couple colors and, you know, see what you like, there are some really gorgeous ones. That green, yellow is really nice. You can also look at what the pigment numbers are. Most of these are single pigments in this set, but if you go and buy by the tube or by the pan, then you of course can make sure that you're getting all single pigment colors. I use the Mimic Kolinsky and the Mimic Squirrel brushes. Both are completely vegan. They perform really well, and as long as you don't leave your brush in the water overnight, I weep. I weep for this. I don't even know how this happened, honestly. I've got cracks in this one. It's so sad. It makes me so sad when I leave a brush in the water overnight, and yet I still do.
It happens.
Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.